I go by they, them, but please refer to the panel as a whole. Now I invite my panelists to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Anshuman. I'm the panelist for this room. Please refer to the panel as a whole. Best of luck to both teams.
Cool. Then if I could get Gav to do their introductions in speaking order, including who's giving the reply.
Hi, I sent it in chat. So just to reiterate, Enzo, Lorenzo will be speaking first, and then Haduka will be speaking second and reply, and I'll be whipping. So yeah.
Wait, so Daniel is giving the reply?
Yes, Daniel Haduka.
And then up.
Hello, Ashley is going first, Ian Chai going second, and reply, Gelson going third.
Okay, in that case, without further ado, assuming everyone is ready, I invite the Prime Minister to open the debate.
Okay, thanks. Am I seen? Am I heard?
Also, if my panelist, if you'd be able to put timestamps in the chat, if possible. If not, then I think Kim should time themselves.
Yep, I'll do the same.
Yeah, are we all good? Okay. Before I start, POIs, I'll take them through voice. Please don't put it in the chat. I won't be looking at that. And just to flag, trigger warning, I might be talking about some violent contexts and content. So please tag out if you're not into that. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Hisashi Uchi was a nuclear worker that was exposed to extreme amounts of radiation. This resulted into him experiencing peeled skin, rotting away while he was still alive, and basically burns all throughout his own body. The Japanese government was so adamant to keep him alive because they thought it was the most moral and just thing to do. This subjected the rest of his life to being a living hell, even though he begged for certain death. This is very similar to the case that we're going to run on government side. So our policy and our goal is very simple. We want the least amount of suffering while we want to maximize happiness in our world. We agree with pacifism coming from government side. We determined that cutting this tree is the most pacifist manner of achieving maximum happiness and the least amount of suffering. So our policy is simple. Considering this is a housewood motion, in our world, before we decide to cut down the tree, we'll first create dialogue and become friends with the Bubblehead people. This will allow us to understand their motives, their cultures, and their belief systems in order to make sure that our decision is one, supported by merit, and 2, emotionally supported as well. And as soon as we cut down this tree, we will go to therapy. We will attend support groups. We will basically find methods and ways in order to basically atone or at least cope with the current situation that we have created for ourselves when we do cut down the tree. So the first point of framing that I want to make here is how beliefs are malleable. Think of how Christians end up not being too religious throughout their whole life because of how they apply biblical texts differently in their own living. Think of how activists choose certain strategies in terms of promoting their own platform. Sometimes they're pacifist, sometimes they're violent, sometimes they do whatever they want. And 3, think of how capitalism, as an example, when people are still so starry-eyed and bright-eyed when they are young, they buy into capitalism. When they grow older, they become more disenfranchised. They buy into other economic structures such as socialism and the like. These things are true because 1, our brains are influenced and elastic in nature. This means that when we are influenced by our external stimuli, it's more likely that we are going to change our own belief systems as well. We react the same way we receive. 2, how beliefs are malleable as a whole. Think of how our belief systems are malleable as a whole. Think of how Christianity used to buy into the system of gold, God, and glory as their main objective, and now it's mostly just charity. And 3, of how the information we receive at the very moment we live is really imperfect and incomplete in nature. This means that the decisions we make at the moment thereof are reliant of the information we have on hand. This means as the more information we receive throughout our own living and throughout our own life, the more things that we are able to change, the more things that we are able to adapt to. So the conclusion to this framing is simple. 1, pacifism can be reinterpreted. Obviously, when you face a reality of an entire community believing that the best way of achieving nirvana or happiness is them entirely dying, maybe your pacifism then is going to change, or your perception of pacifism is going to be different. And 2, on how the moral shift is likely going to change as well. Because obviously speaking, considering how the brain is elastic in nature, maybe there are some things that you're going to have to shift towards. There are some things that you have to move towards. We still think this is still under pacifism. I'll explain why. So the first thing I want to argue here as to how is why bubbleheads are actually suffering right now. As long as they are alive, as according to the Infoslide, they are always going to be unreleased into heaven. They are never going to achieve nirvana. They're never going to achieve full happiness. So why is it then that this pacifist is going to care? But before, POI go.
Christians are often terrified of death as well. Even the most devout Christians will spend large amounts of money on medicine to avoid death as a whole. This means that life isn't suffering as compared to heaven if you're not completely certain about heaven, or for instance, if you just don't perceive being a regular human as suffering.
Notice, your POI relies on outside looking in. This means you buy into the belief systems that exist in our world, but in their world, everybody is certain that if they do die, they enter heaven. In Christianity's sake, it is still unlikely, but on their side, everybody fully buys into the system. You cannot apply human rationality to what we already call bubbleheads. That's kind of weird, right? But moving on to the three structural reasons as to why this pacifist would care and would cut down the tree. One, on the Infoslide itself, considering that they are able to communicate with you, to empathize with you, and to basically beg things of you, we are likely going to be able to assume that one, they are sentient in nature, two, they are intelligent, and three, they have the social structures in place. Obviously, they have a president. It means they have leadership structures as well. This means that they are already very proximate to what humanity already believes and relies on, except the only thing that's different to them is that they are certain that death is their only release, death is their only escape. But either way, these people are still as proximate as human beings as possible. And two, how you basically bear the unique burden of their entire existence. You already found the tree yourself, and you're likely the only person that knows. This may seem arbitrary in nature, but we tell you that this is a special responsibility lodged against you. We can parallel this to how governments have classified information, and they use this classified information that only they do know to basically act accordingly and to make their own special and unique decisions based on the information made only available to them. And three, as to how pacifism is basically as a goal to minimize suffering and to maximize happiness. This means that in their world, they're going to subject bubbleheads to eternal life of either purgatory or hell. Because in their world, it's more likely than not that these individuals are never going to be able to seek current happiness or basically nirvana. We tell you that's really apprehensible. That's not really in the lines of pacifism. So the implications to these kinds of things are clear. One, on how future generations of bubbleheads will either go to hell or persist in purgatory. We can parallel this to the real world, for example. As long as you assume that these individuals' only release is death, it's likely then that the world they exist in is likely plagued by the same things that we do also suffer from. It's probably likely that these people suffer from discrimination, sexism. They also probably suffer from climate change in their own realities. If we do agree that these things are outside paradise, obviously they also have the same rigors that what we already do receive right now, they also probably have the same harms as well. And two, on the basis of guilt, you bear the responsibility of infinite amount of beings not being able to enter paradise because you decided to not cut a non-sentient tree. Think of the comparison there, right? Your choice is either to cut a non-sentient tree or to subject infinite number of bubbleheads to basically a world where they are likely going to suffer because they already know they're not going to enter heaven, so on and so forth. And the impacts to these are clear. One, not chopping a tree will lead to infinite suffering, something I've already covered. And two, on the certainty and harms. You already know that this is inherent to them. It's already inherent that they want to die. It's already inherent that they're going to go to heaven. What is not inherent on your side is your beliefs into pacifism as a whole. You're not sure if you really are going to be pacifist into the future, but you're already sure that these people really want to die. I already think that it's already very clear, the decision that is already quite easy to make on the side of government side. So it's very clear what we want to push from government side. We want certainty. We don't want uncertainty. So proud to propose.
And thank you for that speech. I now welcome the leader of the opposition to open the negative bench.
Oh, have I heard? Okay, great.
Oh yeah, POIs in chat. Okay. You do not, and never will you have, a moral obligation to be the one that pulls the trigger when the person in heaven's gate begs you to shoot them because they want to go to heaven. This is particularly the case considering you are an outsider looking in. You have no moral obligation to that. You should prioritize yourself and your own morality. All right. If I go on, a little bit of clarification on what exactly our side supports. We do believe that obviously we don't want the tree to be cut, but if it's truly inevitable, like at the very least, we don't want it to be by us. In the off chance that someone else enters the portal, like while obviously we may not agree with it, but at the same time, we think it's far preferable that someone else cuts down the tree rather than us. We think that it may not be the most likely possibility, but the possibility they're willing to entertain. Okay. So a few rebuttals of them before I go on. Firstly, about whether or not your views are malleable, and secondly, about how like obviously people are currently suffering, and then it's your responsibility to reduce that. Firstly, like around the whole idea about your views are malleable, recognize that sure, this may be something that is perhaps possible, but if you think about it, it's incredibly unlikely. Look at the moral system that you currently uphold. It's firstly one that you have probably cultivated throughout your entire life, and secondly, it's probably something that you believe in quite deeply. Like recognize the magnitude to which you actually believe in this, that you're unwilling to kill even the smallest ant. This is something that most humans wouldn't even do, insofar as like it's quite extreme and it's quite difficult to do. So the fact that you adhere to this and you actively try to keep to this probably shows that you believe in this to quite a high extent. Because of that, I don't think it's really true that your views are going to be changed, especially in this like short amount of time by these people who you barely know. And even if if you really want to believe that views are malleable, we don't know why exactly the malleability of our own beliefs should take precedence over the malleability of the Bubblehead belief, insofar as like those can presumably be changed under their paradigm as well. And secondly, about how people like are currently suffering just because of the fact that you're not in heaven. Like recognize in status quo, obviously people want to enter heaven, Christians want to enter heaven, but at the same time, just because you're not in heaven does not mean you're necessarily suffering. Like that, you can't just equate that. I think people are still able to have very good lives in the status quo, even in even not in heaven. All right, 2 points for house today. Firstly, about why exactly you should inherently prioritize your own moral framework, and secondly, about how you actually feel more guilt on our side. Firstly, the prioritization of your own moral framework. Now, necessarily, what does our actor look like? As we mentioned, this is they are a pacifist, but more importantly, we want to like claim that this is a non-consequentialist claim. Why is this the case? Because there are many instances where violence are usually permissible, or they can actually be beneficial, especially when you're considering like the particular context, like the fact that you're unwilling to actually go against like even small poisonous insects that could kill your entire family. I think that that's quite extreme, and it probably shows that, and the fact that you engage with this means that it's inherently the violence in an act of itself that you choose to believe as an inherent sin, which is inherently like quite non-consequentialist. It's something that does not depend on the outcome of that violence being good or bad. So even if like they would be happier, like even if the Bubblehead people say that they would be happier in like if they were to die, like insofar as it's a more consequentialist belief, I think you as a person as someone who does not inherently believe in that, is probably likely to go against your own moral framework. Now, why does this matter incredibly deeply to you? Well, I think firstly, it's just a core part of your identity. Think about how like a lot of the moral claims that we ourselves hold. Like for instance, if I am a Christian, I have honed this identity through many, many years of like things like self-discovery. And secondly, like these are probably something that has been incredibly socialized to us. And this is my second piece of characterization about what this person necessarily looked like. We think that, yeah, pacifism can obviously come from many sources, but I think a very large source of this is also from religion. So think about religions like Buddhism, where non-violence is inherently part of that doctrine. Like, we think that insofar as like, so this is incredibly important because it's not just about a core part of your identity, but if you don't abide by that principle of non-violence, it means dramatic consequences for yourself. You may not be able to go to nirvana if you are violent. You will not be able to go to your own conception of heaven if you yourself are violent. And next, why exactly should the prioritization of your own moral framework, like why should you prioritize your own moral framework against the wishes of these people? Because firstly, you are the one who has, obviously you're the most proximate actor. You're the only one you have epistemic access to. Hence, we think that you probably should prioritize yourself. Secondly, you're the one who's going to have to deal with the consequences. So all of the guilt that you feel, all of the realization that you have gone against your identity, and the fear that, for instance, you may not be able to go to heaven because of this. These are all things that you yourself is going to feel. And so insofar, and we think that this is like incredibly heavy moral like guilt, and that's something that And so far as like you're gonna have the possibility that you should prioritize yourself in the short term. But thirdly, you've known these bubbleheads for like a day max, like or like maybe for like a month if you really want to go like their model, but like, oh, you actually like actually make sense of them. Like versus the years that you spend building your own moral framework in terms of the time, in terms of like the amount like in which you believe in the moral framework, we think that you should just take precedence over your own. But before I go on to my second point, yes. Any points?
Sorry, it's unengaging. Under your paradigm, you also experience this guilt, particularly because you've killed millions of bubbleheads. Why is this comparable to killing one single tree?
What? I'm sorry, like, isn't outside the one that doesn't kill like plenty of bubbleheads? I'm really confused by that. But in fact, if you really I'm gonna take you at your best case, and then I'm gonna assume that you mean like the whole point that you said previously about how you feel guilt about not sending them to heaven. In which case, I'm gonna deal that right now. I'm moving on to my second point about guilt and how you actually feel more guilt on our side. Now, recognize that firstly, 2 points. There's a lack of certainty in religion, in this religion, because number one, you probably as mentioned, like you don't believe in it, you're not a bubblehead, you don't like, you weren't born into the system, you probably don't believe in it. But secondly, like religion as a whole, religion inherently requires faith, and there's like it inherently is very supernatural in origin, and because of that, there's no actual rational certainty that this person will actually go to heaven. Like sorry, that the bubbleheads will actually go to heaven if you do kill them. So, yeah, so even if the religion says it would. So you may possibly be killing an entire race of people for absolutely fucking nothing. And so, and they probably are going to say like, oh, they consented to this, but recognize this is likely going to be illegitimate because 3 reasons. You were born into this religion, there's no choice, you can't probably like exit it. In so far as they say that all bubbleheads believe it, you probably, if you do leave, you're probably going to be alienated. Secondly, like there's lack of information, you live in an echo chamber, you have no like way of exiting this religion in the first place. But thirdly, and this engages with the whole idea about we'll have dialogue. Recognize that there's a power dynamic between the king and the people. If you do actually disagree with the religion, are you really going to speak out in front of the king? You're probably fucking not. Insofar as like, you know that this king is someone that everyone trusts. So if you do kill these people, you probably feel an immense amount of guilt because firstly, you have killed them all for nothing. But secondly, like humans are just incredibly socialized to dislike death. This is where I'll deal with the counterfactual. Like, even if you do feel guilt for not allowing them to enter heaven, insofar as we have been socialized over the years to believe that death is an incredibly bad thing, that is something that should be mourned, you're probably gonna feel even more guilt on our side insofar as you've caused the death of an entire group of people. And so recognize that this guilt sucks insofar as it affects the way that you perceive yourself, insofar as it's a heavy burden that you have to face every day. We think that we just face that far more on our side. So proud of us.
All right, thank you for that speech. I'm really sorry, but we might have to pause the debate because I'm being kicked out of the room that I'm using, and I'm going to have to hobble to another room. So there might be like a 2-minute intermission. Just give me a second.
No worries. Hope everything's okay.
You know what? It could be better, but it's okay. Yes, we will. Well, I have to. Sorry. Almost there. I'm gonna sit down over here. All right, if we're up to Deputy Prime Minister is welcome to start when they're ready.
Hi, audible and visible. the first thing I'd like to reestablish in this debate is the factor of consent. Primarily because these bubbleheads did ask you and did beg you to primarily kill them because this is something that they wanted. They were sure that they wanted to do these things, and they even and the Infoslide even told us that they trusted their president on behalf of asking us. This is particularly important because if guilt is a factor in this debate, then I would say that guilt is significantly reduced and your moral culpability for killing these bubbleheads is significantly reduced if it is consensual. That primarily means that under their paradigm, you cannot say that guilt will suddenly be bad, particularly because the pacifism that they say is something that's important is a pacifism that relies on the idea that people do not want to be killed and they do not want to be ascribed towards like a particular end of suffering. But under our paradigm, where these people did ask to be killed and to end their suffering, we think it's particularly justified. Therefore, this guilt won't happen. The first thing I'd like to point out is under their idea that that moral obligation doesn't exist under their side. They say that others should do it, or rather, like on our side, they say that others should do it. I think that there's a big contradiction in their case, because if LO says that you should encourage others to do it, that means that you're still morally culpable for doing it as a particular person who is pacifist, particularly because if you want to win on the idea of prioritizing your own morality as a pacifist, you're equally as morally culpable because you know as a fact that this tree will get cut down, and in fact you encouraged other people to cut it down. So either way, your hands are tainted under their side. That means that they are still going to be guilty regardless because of their policy. This is an important piece of response, particularly because if OP wants to win on prioritizing their own morality, then their policy waters this down, or at the very least means that they concede now that your information currently changes your actions and may change your identity, because humans are not monoliths, they change. But the second thing they say coming from LO is that culture is not malleable, particularly because the premise they launch is that you cultivated this your entire life. I think that premise, you cultivated this your entire life, is already conceding to the idea under government that your entire life is not the end of your life. You don't have perfect information on our side. That is, you've cultivated this because the information you've had thus far has made it so that your current situation will make you more likely to be pacifist than not. But given that this changes the entire status quo and entirely like everything in your life, this means that LO concedes the idea that when something entirely new passes into your life, you can change. And this is a good response because it solidifies, regardless of whether or not BLO responds to this, that people inherently are not static. This could be a formative experience in your life, which might make you an even better pacifist in the future, or even a particularly good pacifist because now you know the lines of which you should tread or not tread. But even in a worst case that you end up not being a pacifist, why is this so bad? You could live with this guilt, and this might be the worst case under our side. But this guilt can be removed, particularly when you go to therapy, and you could particularly live a life that is much more fulfilling once you've analyzed everything that happened in your past, and now you could become a better person who is now more informed and probably a much better person because you have more information. The conclusion to this is that guilt is not life-ending. It might be bad, but it's not life-ending. But for this guy, what it actually means is that now you get to further your beliefs. You get an experience that might be like formational for you and into your future, and it might be good. Yeah, POI.
Remind me again, is pacifism the belief we should maximize happiness, or that all life is sacred and we should not compromise it?
Yeah, so all life is so yeah, we're contending between pacifism or utilitarianism, right? The fact that this guy is pacifist also has to contend to the fact that normal humans will have a utilitarian metric in their minds. That is, you cannot avoid the fact that you will have to at some point weigh whether or not killing one tree is more moral than killing billions and infinitely amount of people being subject to purgatory. If I do have to engage on the metric of guilt, I would say that this is a metric at worst, because you might not go to heaven because you killed one tree, and you also might not go to heaven because you've killed an entire generation, subjecting them to purgatory and their personal hells. But to break this deadlock, I would say that there are three structural reasons why there's comparatively significantly less guilt under our side when you do cut down this tree. For three reasons. Number one, these people, the bubbleheads, are sentient moral beings who asked you, which means that they formed an emotional connection and mental connection, but you also have ascribed morality upon them. Number two, these are real lives and even more dynamic lives compared to a tree. But number three, this tree is simply a monolith with only one dynamic life. You either live or you die, that's it. But under their side, what you have is people who might suffer, who might not achieve nirvana and like the life that they want. These are people who have a much more dynamic way of living, which means that in any way, if you don't kill it, you subject yourselves to an infinite amount of guilt because you do not know and cannot imagine how much torment they're experiencing, but you can live with the guilt that one tree died because that is something that you can live with. I'll take the POI again because you need more engagement.
Yeah, so Infoslide says you cut the tree and you kill millions of people. So we're not the ones that killed millions of people. You were the ones that did so.
Yeah.
Where's
So
the-
we're killing millions of people who asked for that. You are subjecting multiple generations essentially to suffering, which you said is outsider looking in, which we say is a more dynamic type of suffering and harm under our side, which death is much more comparable to, and we think is better than. The extension. Oh, the final thing. They say that religion has no certainty. You're not even sure if you go to like heaven or whether or not it's true. First response, Pascal's wager. If it's not true, at the very least, these people do not get subjected to all of the harms in status quo. But number two, if it is true, you've allowed them infinite amount of like benefits and happiness under our side. So we don't think this is a particularly comparative thing, just in terms of the probabilities. Look at it. You're benefiting a multiple amounts of people. In the worst case, at the very least, you're ending their suffering. The last thing I'd like to argue in extension is why you cause more harm to humanity. This is important because you've opened Pandora's box of infinite harms and risks to humanity, which are both irreversible and intense towards individuals. Because they've evolved similarly to humans, it's highly likely that they've developed weapons, violence, and despitefulness that is likely to retaliate against you if you don't do this. There are three structural reasons why this is true. Number one, they beg you, which means that they are desperate to reach the paradise, which they have been impatient, desperate, and have been important to them. Number two, the denial of this would be the tipping point because we know that they were nice enough to ask, but sadly, they don't have the pacifist creed unlike you. But finally, they have the same way that radicals go rogue if they don't reach their nirvana. Extremism is likely to happen under their paradigm. The impacts of this is that you could die, others could die, and you don't know what the future might be. We tell you that the solution must be to cut down this tree and end any of this Pandora's box or close it while you still can, because you don't know what else might happen. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. I now welcome the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Everyone ready? Good. All right. And now I'm become death, destroyer of worlds. Robert Oppenheimer knew what he was getting into, was paid millions of dollars by the US Army, was hailed as a celebrity and had a society around him telling him he was moral for doing the things he did. And yet he died guilty and ashamed of what he had done to the Japanese people. The reality is, you, a pacifist, are doing this to billions more people. You will die guilty. You have to side with all. First question then, on what kind of person you are. Opposition tells us that, well, you might be a pacifist in the past, but this experience will change you. I've got a couple of responses. The first is that they speculate that this experience will change you. Just because you encounter a culture of suicidal individuals doesn't mean that you buy into their suicidal ideology. Like the fact that they say kill us doesn't mean that you're okay with them killing them. In fact, as a human being, you've evolved not to want to hurt others. It's an inherent human desire not to harm other individuals as well. But beyond that, you clearly have already internalized ideas of pacifism. They tell you that, but your past experiences haven't changed you. You are clearly open to future change. But note that the fact that your past experiences are malleable, right? If you're thinking of a very, very pacifist person, a person who's completely vegetarian, in fact, cannot eat any like ground plants because they might uproot those plants and kill an insect. If it's a person who can see a dangerous spider and not step on it, in fact, deliberately saying we must save that spider, you probably have had other individuals criticizing your beliefs as well. You've probably also seen things like social harms being done onto minorities around you, and yet told yourself you should not go out and protest and should not go out and riot because you want to be a pacifist person. You genuinely think that this is the moral thing to do. This means you've probably already had your faith tested by very simple fact that you are surrounded by non-pacifists, because most people don't believe that. You probably are a person who's seen forms of social injustice in the past. You probably already have had your faith tested, POIs in chat. All of this then means that you probably are a person who are unmalleable as a result. But what kind of person are you? We point out that you are a non-utilitarian person. As a pacifist, you probably have utilitarian harms you could inflict upon other creatures that you will not inflict. For instance, insects, right? They are spreaders of disease and poison. A spider could kill a whole family. A mosquito breeding in your household could literally kill you and your neighbors by spreading malaria or the Zika virus. Instead of killing these creatures or dumping their eggs out, you will carefully take that pail and move it a few feet and put it down. All of this implies that you clearly have a vast prioritization of doing no harm, even at utilitarian consequence. This argument itself should win us the round because it immediately shows that your morality system does not gel with that of the suicidal death cult. And just because you're exposed to a suicidal death cult does not mean you'll believe the suicidal death cult. That's an absurd assertion for government bench to base their case on. Second question then on whether you're harming yourself. The way that this issue tips is whether or not you feel more guilt from inaction as compared to guilt for action. I will explain now why you don't actually feel guilt from inaction. The first is you likely don't believe that you're withholding these individuals from heaven. The premise of the argument is you genuinely believe that you're condemning them to purgatory or hell by virtue of you not killing these individuals. But clearly, you're not part of that religion. You are not socialized into it. In order to genuinely believe it, you have to internalize all of the tenets. You have to overcome any religions you probably have. Most people are religious. You don't think that this is the case. You can oftentimes shrug that off and go, they were mistaken. They wanted me to kill all of them. Clearly, I'm not going to do something that immoral. But secondly, a lot of the times we are more okay with inaction than action because all you're condemning them to is normal life. It's just going around finding happiness in terms of eating good food, traveling the country. The Infoslide that says they're a liberal democracy, that's already better than most of what we've got, including myself. All of this then means that these are probably people who are living decent lives already. All of this then means that inaction probably isn't causing you to feel that guilty. But I'm going to go a step further. I will point out that oftentimes action can lead you to feel guilt, even when you know that it's for good purposes. Soldiers come back from war with PTSD from killing 1 or 2 people, even though they know that they're defending their homeland and defending their country, and the other fella would have shot them if they hadn't shot them at first. But they still feel super guilty about it. If I were to euthanize my parents, even if they consented and had horrible diseases, I'd feel guilt about it. Even if I rationally know that they consent and as I'm doing it for utilitarian purpose, I still feel guilt over this process as well because I have an inherent human desire not to hurt anyone, not to say if I were a pacifist on top of that. Last question, are you genuinely doing good? And this further rebuttal will flip the entire case. Their case actually relies on their religion being true, that you factually are sending these people to heaven by chopping down this tree. But there are 4 reasons why this religion is probably false. The first and most trivially is that every religion has statistically a very low probability of being the true religion. Think about it, right? There are literal hundreds of religions on earth. If this is one species out of billions of species out there, the odds of this religion being the true religion is 1 in billions. Secondly, you probably don't believe that because you are likely an individual who have grown up with your own religious tenets. You probably believe in Jainism statistically because those are the actual religions that teach extreme pacifism. Or if you believe in Islam or Christianity, you don't believe in this religion as well. Thirdly, theologically, it makes no sense that you can chop down the tree and that's the only way to send people to heaven. Typically, heaven is infinite rewards. If God will reward people based on a tree, that just makes no theological sense. Fourthly, the religion is slightly consolidated by individuals within an echo chamber because religious authority in this world clearly doesn't get theologically challenged. Clearly, it is based on limited readings of whatever scripture they originally had. It was entirely possible that this was twisted for some perverse reason by a death cult. All of these structural reasons then imply that this religion is probably false. If you chop down the tree, either these people will die and not go to heaven, or I'll explain more about this after I take the point.
Yeah,
Okay,
sorry.
I'll just continue.
Yeah, no.
Go fast.
Yeah, sorry. So a lot of people fight for democracy and protest, even if these are at the cost of their lives. Obviously, purpose is more important than just living. That's what government stands for.
So that's true of people in general, but not you, right? You are not fighting for democracy. You're not fighting for anything. You're a pacifist. You're in a tree. You're helping your grandparents take care of a tree. These are different people than you. Beyond moving back then, either you cut down the tree and these people will die. Who knows? Maybe the portal was what was giving them air and they cut down the tree, they suffocate and die. Maybe these people were living in the tree and then the tree dies and they all die in sorts of nutrients, whatever. Or you chop down the tree, nothing happens, and whatever political system that they had in this world collapses. It was everyone realizes that the president was the head of a death cult. They all kill the president. There are massive riots on the streets. Every parliamentarian government leader there gets hanged and guillotined because clearly you are the ones who incited this rebellion. Last thing I want to rebut in this debate is the idea that this species retaliate. Clearly not. If they could travel across portals, instead of asking you to chop down the tree, instead of enacting revenge upon you, just find other people to chop down the tree. Eventually, they'll get one that will chop down the tree and no war in humanity will occur. Oppose.
All right, thank you for that speech, and I welcome Governor Whip.
Hi, am I audible and visible? I will assume yes. Whoa!
Whoa.
Whoa! Whoa! Stop! Okay. POI's voice. Yeah. She, her. Yeah. Great. Once again, voice, because I'm not looking. Just don't badger. A purposeless life is not worth living, and that's the inherent truth that people in Hong Kong faced because they rallied against China, when inherently they could have just lived a life with a good relationship with one of the biggest global superpowers and had one of the best security systems of having that type of superpower on their side. They recognized that they wanted their own democracy and they wanted their own political systems and they wanted to make decisions for themselves. And because of that, we recognize that purpose is far more important than the concept of living, but it's also more important than stepping in and making decisions for people who are actively telling you that this is a better off alternative for them. A couple of things that I want to call out before I start and move into my weighing. One, under the responses on how they try to skirt their burden of the motion and say, I don't want the blood on my hands. Like, I don't want to cut this tree off. First, I think that it is just unengaging and not comparative within the context of the debate. But two, Enzo already said, our first speaker, that we are likely the only people who are going to find out about this. Ian can't fiat and say that they can just travel between different portals the way they do in MCU. It's most likely that this is the only alternative they had, because if they didn't, then they wouldn't have asked you in the first place. The reason they took the harm or the risk of asking some random person's backyard or owner of the backyard means that they are likely going to want to do this, but also because they have no other alternative and recognize that this is the only thing they can do. But two, I think it's uncertain if other people are going to find it, so it's still speculative at most. But even if it does happen, that still doesn't mean that it takes away from the fact that you are somebody who knew and had the option to do it and did not do it, which means that to a certain extent, you still harbor a certain amount of guilt or responsibility that Haduka proves and still goes unresponded to. But two, I think it still goes against your belief either way. Like, if somebody is just going to inherently kill it, if you're a pacifist and you never want to kill people on their side and suddenly you just say, oh, I just want someone else to kill them, the whole point of being on pacifist on their side is 0 deaths. So it doesn't really make sense that they suddenly just want people to cut it off for them anyways. So I think at best it's symmetric, and at worst it's just really just skirting their motion. Two, on how you build this on your whole life and how this is something that has already been tried and tested. Hello, how many people have you asked to be murdered by? Not a lot of people. And that's because of the fact that you probably aren't tested in this regard, in this moral ideology that probably exists only on our side. This is the only time in your life where you're going to be at the hands of people or going to have the decision to ensure that people are going to live a better life or a worse off life, depending on two. So if the idea is this pacifist, it is a clash of this debate and it is important. But when you are an individual who weighs utility and you're an individual who weighs why this is inherently harmful to you or to the other people, then you're probably willing to take off the trade-off of like killing a tree for the expense of other people. But before I move on, go.
I'm going to give you a gun right now and ask to be killed. Will you shoot me just to expand your moral framework?
Sure. Like, if you want it and if that's something that you want, then it's something you're probably going to do. If I gave you a button and there was somebody with stage 4 cancer and they had euthanasia, would you not press it because you go, oh, I feel so bad if I kill someone? No, because this isn't about you. This isn't just about yourself or the pacifism that exists within your moral spectrum. It's also about the external lives that are affected by this. Then on the discussion of utility, on how there's levels of guilt, and they try to akin this to killing a mosquito or taking down a tree or just simply like not killing a poisonous bug that might harm your family. Evidently, this is a big harm or this is a big misconception insofar as you're already talking about a large group of people. We think that killing a large individual or the bubbleheads at the end of the day means that it's something that is going to is something that you inherently want to save insofar as there are different levels of grief. If I kill a cockroach because I hate cockroaches, then that's probably not going to be something I'm grieving on. But if I kill my brother, for example, or somebody who's also a human, then I'm probably going to have a level of guilt in that ability. So to a certain extent, because of the fact that they are similar to humans, you have a level of utility because of the fact that they are somebody that you can relate to, but also somebody that you have conversed with. Even if you've known that person for a day, if you find out that like your acquaintance died, then that's still something that affects you because you recognize to a certain extent that this is something that is scary or whatever. Then I want to talk about on this really weird extension on how are you doing moral good? The thing with opposition, and the reason I think why they lose this debate is not only are they one, speculative, two, unengaging, but three, they're making decisions for people that they don't need to be making decisions for. One, their discussion is that how this is akin to religion and how there is like different types of religion that are likely to exist. Read the info slide. The Bubbleheads only have one religion in opposition, but two, it doesn't matter if it's real or not. If this is something that is inherently important to these people that are asking you to take down the street to die, then we think that is still an inherent good because you want to help these people, or you at least want to like have this certain sort of service if you value life at the end of the day. So even if to a certain extent you do value life, if these sentient people are coming here and telling you that to a certain extent they are suffering, then that inherently means that you want to help them and save them. It doesn't matter if heaven or hell or purgatory is real or not. If this is real to the people now, then that is something that is vital and valuable. In the same way, we don't know if Islam or Christianity or I don't know, Buddhism is real or not, but we allow people to engage in these practices to whatever extent that occurs because we are able to understand that this is something that is important to them. Second, then, what is the most certain harm? Bubbleheads will forever feel suffering because of you. And they try to say that death is the only type of suffering. But I would argue that living in a system that is inherently something that is harmful to you is probably worse off. Generations and generations of Bubbleheads will probably not die, or will probably not die and continue to suffer. I think this is inherently true because of the fact that if they come to you and tell you that they want to die, and if opposition says that this is a big deal, then it is something that is not only valuable to them, but something that they're willing to risk their life for, which inherently means that if it is something that is not occurred, suffering will happen internally because it's in the same way that people who are probably like committing crimes, for example, or not committing crimes or doing good, have this internal conflict about the religion that they want to parallel to, which then means that it's not only akin to human or like akin to human experience in that regard, but it's true because they wouldn't be begging if they weren't like existing in that regard. So I think even if it's not large suffering, there's still internal suffering that ought to occur, which Enzo already said and preempted a while ago and wasn't responded to sufficiently. And I think we already discussed that we could probably communicate on these matters with these people eventually. I think if death is as scary as they say, the fact that they're willing to give it up is culturally important then in that regard. But two, where is guilt worse off? I think guilt on government is only likely on the fact that one, you killed a tree because somebody asked you to kill their whole community that they all agreed that they wanted to do and all agreed that they trusted will want to do. Even if you do feel guilt from killing the tree or those thousands and billions or infinite amount of people, the fact that you were able to follow through what their request is gives you more solace and is only mutually exclusive on our side because you fulfilled what they asked you to do. I think even in the worst case that we don't go to therapy, we still get that win. Guilt on opposition is recognizing that somebody asked you to get them out of the current harms or the current life that they don't want to live in because of like religious or structural reasons or whatnot, and ignoring that and knowing that people forever are going to live life like that. That is something that is a certain harm on their side and is a certain like guilt that they are likely to carry forever. The guilt of knowing that people are dying even when they asked you, even when they told you that this was something culturally important to them. And so I don't think opposition can win this debate for the fact that they are unengaging. I don't think they're imaginative enough in their case, but also for the very fact that they are speculative, and I don't think it's just like fair in the context of the debate. So with that, I'm proud to prop.
Thank you for that speech. I now invite opposition whip.
All right, cool. Give me a quick second. I'll take POIs verbally. Starting in 3, 2, 1. There is no crime greater than the betrayal of oneself. There is no greater waste than the decades of building your belief in the sanctity of life fade into the folly of a cult you don't even believe in. In the grand scheme of things, it's not the speculative what-ifs of the past that will destroy you inside, but it's the definite knowledge that you, one who swore never to take a life, just committed genocide against an entire species of people. I have one strategic comment that I want to make on this case from the government. Because the clutch or response the Gov opens up with and responds to us with is the claim that morality and belief is malleable, and that our idea that life is inherently sacred is not absolute the more new things that we come across. They seem to think that this helps them come up with some new form of a burden to prove an alternative interest for the actor. But we have two reasons for why this is fatal to their case. A, the fact that immediately opening up their case with the claim that morality is compromisable is an immediate concession that will be compromising some, if not most, of our moral values as the actor, which immediately means they're on the back foot, because the only way you get out of this unscathed is if you perform all sorts of mental gymnastics to delude yourself into thinking you're not guilty of what you previously denounced absolutely as a sin. But secondly, if it's true that people can change their beliefs over the cause of being exposed to new material, then why is the Bubbleheads' belief that they should die absolute? Is it not new information that some dude from another world came in with another religion that they've never heard of? Is it not new information that someone can finally come in and persuade them against the words of their leader that they don't have to actually die? And I think regardless of our ability to actually persuade them, what this proves strategically is the purpose that government argues for is not absolute, and it's not something we should defend at all times, which is why the idea of, oh, they want to die so we should let them, doesn't immediately let them win the round, because we need to directly tie it to the interest of the actor and explain why it links to the basic of the moral framework, which leads me to two clashes that I want to explain in this debate. First, what is the basis of your moral framework, and does this fall under pacifism? I think a line from the Gov Whip highlights a major problem in their case, because they said this isn't about you. But it is, because it's an actor debate. So it shouldn't matter if you prove that logically, purpose or happiness should hold over life. Insofar as you don't prove that it aligns with the moral foundations of the actor, Gov is destined to lose the round. I want to note that Gov's entire case line on this issue is hinged on a major assertion that your concept of pacifism is based on the want to maximize people's happiness and purpose. I want to note that beyond this, they never actually mechanistically prove this. They just kind of write on this idea of a logical link, and they say, oh, because this is true, we need to immediately save everyone from like internal damnation or hell. There are two problems with this idea. Firstly, it's clear that happiness and consequence is not your priority as a pacifist. Ian gave you plenty of illustrations of when you face a dichotomy between the benefit of individuals and the saving of lives. That's why you'll probably see a potentially dangerous insect that will harm someone later down the future, but because you don't want to be the direct link towards the hurt, towards the end of the life of that particular insect, you choose not to kill it in the end. But and this is also why consent doesn't actually matter according to you, because it's the same way one would feel guilty pulling the plug of a family member, even if they consented to euthanasia. Because as an actor, the moral grief for the objective harm that you've caused to another living sentient being goes against every single moral fiber of your being. But secondly, I want us to note that the prerequisite of being able to feel the meaning of this happiness is not met on the government, because it is completely contingent on you being able to subscribe to the moral beliefs of those people to begin with. This is where the clash on their claim, or this is where we clash on their claim of certainty as well. Because when making a moral decision, you need to know that you're making the right one. Why is it impossible on the Gov? Ashley and Ian make it clear to you that you do not subscribe to their religion. In fact, your belief of pacifism probably is linked towards an alternative religion that you're actually subscribe to, like Buddhism of the other sort. But it doesn't mean that, but it ultimately means that you don't believe in this whole like killing yourself for the sake of entering nirvana or whatever is that case. What does this mean? There is a psychological and logical like mismatch between the outcomes of your action versus the beliefs that you think are actually going to happen. Even if the other people tell you, no, we will go to heaven, even if you kill us, we will achieve nirvana or whatever is the case, you can't get it out of your head that that's not empirically untrue, because you do not believe in that religion. So for all that you know, you just killed millions, billions of people for the sake of absolutely nothing, and you have no way to ensure that this is actually the afterlife that these Bubbleheads are actually going to go through. The characterization that we gave you on of pacifism that Ashley and Ian gave to you is far more realistic, because you refuse to take lives, not because you want to maximize happiness, but because you truly believe that all life is sacred. And that's why in the past few years you refuse to kill an insect. That's why in the past few years you believe that all life is sacred, and that's why in the past few years you refuse to even uphold the idea of consequence for the sake of performing inaction if it means saving a life. What does this mean on the outcome of this clash? We managed to prove three extremely important facts in this debate. A, we have the more strategic framing of pacifism because it aligns far more with your active choices that you have to make in your daily life. B, we prove that even in your best case, the prerequisite to meet your moral fulfillment is not met because you don't even believe in the religion of these people. And C, if it's true that your pacifism is linked towards the sacredness of life, that means you never, ever want to take a life, no matter what the circumstance is. And this particular situation goes against every fiber of your moral being. Let's weigh out guilt. At our worst, maybe we'll leave the tree feeling a little bit bad because we may never know if the tree people actually achieve happiness. At their best, you suffer the definite harm of having massacred a population, of the speculative nature of a religion that you don't even believe in, and you have to live the rest of your life with the knowledge for that particular case. Even taking them at the very best, I still take inaction with some moral ambiguity compared to the knowledge that you were the definite direct cause of billions of deaths of people. Before I move on to the next thing in my speech, are there any POIs? 3, 2, 1. Let's take them at their best. Is the happiness of the three people worth trading off? This is where DPM's contention of utilitarian weighing works against them. We ultimately feel moral obligations closer to certain people compared towards others. You've just met the Bubbleheads according to what we gave to you in LO, and that means you probably don't feel as proximate to these people. But you know who you do feel proximate to? The culmination of all of your efforts towards the tree that you put in the previous few years, the honoring of the final dying wish of your grandparents, and the want to always preserve this tree for them. They gave it to you to protect this particular tree. They gave it to you to fulfill the final dying wish. If it's true that you truly wanted to protect the ones you love, you would protect the memory of your grandparents compared to the memory of other people that you have, probably never really met to begin with, right? What ultimately matters the most is the lives that you save. What matters the most are the people that you love. Final question in this speech: do we save the world? A very weird argument from DPM came out about how the Bubbleheads could kill you and other people in your world in retaliation for the refusal. I can't explain how unlikely this situation is. Like, you can avoid death very easily by just saying, oh yeah, I'll cut it down. And then when you get it out of the tree, you just don't. But they can't come out to kill you either, because you're assuming the only one you will ever be able to save them. That assumes that they can't come out of the tree themselves and kill you, just like they can't come out and cut it down themselves. So we probably don't actually have a need to save the world. But one thing that we do need to do is to ensure we don't end a world. And that's exactly what happens on the government case. That's why you have to go with the op.
All right, thank you for that speech. I now invite the reply speakers to open the reply portion of the debate.
The thesis of this reply speech is simple. Giving the win to the opposition is the least interventionist thing you can do in this debate, for a couple of reasons. In order for Gov's arguments to manifest, you need to believe in a series of events, each of which we've questioned down the bench. This reply speech will basically illustrate that process to you. The first thing you need to believe is that this individual is previously a pacifist, encounters this new information about the death cult who constantly call themselves, who ask you, please kill us, and then you will no longer be a pacifist. The reason why they have to prove this is because because of our argument that pacifism is absolute, that it is devoid of utilitarian outcomes, and to a certain extent, it sometimes is deeply selfish. The fact that you are perfectly okay with letting poisonous insects live means that you're okay with harm potentially coming onto someone else for the sake of guaranteeing these particular beliefs. This obviously kills all of the argumentation. Therefore, the first point at which you can give us the win is not to believe that this new information changes you, because it likely won't. The fact that you see new information of people asking you to kill them likely doesn't change your mind. We've given you several examples of instances where you might think that someone might consent to dying. For example, people might consent to being euthanized, for instance, but it still feels equally bad to kill them. Your sense of morality probably is so absolute, given these previous tests that you've had before, of potentially putting your family at risk, etc., for the sake of guaranteeing your own morality. This means that if you don't buy that initial jump, you don't buy any of the op case that follows. Let's talk about how our case insulates itself against that jump. Let's assume that you do change your morality altogether and become a non-pacifist or a utilitarian. The next thing we question is whether you believe their religion as a system, not just their morality system. These are independent things. The empirical claim that if I chop down this tree, everyone will die, and then all of the dead souls will rise up into heaven is an empirical claim. This empirical claim, to a utilitarian as well, can be wrong. This is probably the case. There are hundreds of religions existing in the world. All of them are mutually exclusive. Allah cannot be the arbiter of life and death and morality if Jesus is. And Jesus, Allah, and Buddha all cannot possibly be the ones determining who gets into heaven if it is actually determined by an alien species' god who asked them to cut down a tree. This means that the odds of this being factually, consequentially true are little to none. The reality is that these individuals are probably mistaken. They tell you that just because they're mistaken, it's okay because they consented to die. But we question that on several levels. The fact that you are arbitrarily born into this religion, into a society which clearly has no opposition, no alternatives, constantly brainwashes you because everyone around you echoes their agreement to this religion, where you're likely stamped out on if you speak out against this religion, probably means that consenting to die based on a cult-like belief is illegitimate. We give you parallels of status quo death cults, where people in cults who too claim to die. When parents bring their children and ask them to die for a religion, we consider that immoral because we consider that consent illegitimate, no matter how much the brainwashed individual constantly wants to die. This means that even if you aren't a pacifist, if you are utilitarian, utilitarians can also think about the way they're killing billions of people for a speculative outcome, especially a utilitarian who has had no exposure to this religion, who probably comes from another religion like Christianity, Buddhism, any of the myriad religion that the majority of individuals, on average individuals in this world, go through. This means that an average person views this consent as illegitimate. They feel extreme guilt from having killed these individuals, even if they think that they consented, because even if my parents consent to die, I still feel guilt if I euthanize them. Even if the people around me consent to die, I as a human being have ingrained belief that life is sacred, no matter how much you're okay with it. At the end of the day, the only ballot that is plausible, therefore, is an opposition one, because you don't need to do all these mental gymnastics because our case is robust against every single one of these links we take the round. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. And now welcome the government reply.
Audible and visible. Yeah. Good. Thank you. Despite being the more creative case, you have to jump through more logic to believe opposition's bench. The first reason is because under their side, they have two contradictions. The first one is that they say that this principle is absolute and you cannot disobey it. But at the same time, from their LO, they say that you have to ask other people to cut it down because you yourself can't do it. And they say this is not a selfish thing. I don't think that this is true, particularly because the entirety of opposition whips argumentation or responses were about how absolute this is. But at the same time, their case is premised upon how there are alternatives about how you can ask someone else. But it doesn't end there. The second thing that deputy says is that purposeless lives are okay. But then OpWeb suddenly says that we're not willing to trade off this principle because this is the purpose of our life. So if you're not willing to apply the purposelessness of like how you're going to like allow these people to like the bubbleheads to live in a purposeless life, then why is it so much for you to exist with that principle in mind? I just don't think this is factually true, or the individual that you're defending for doesn't even think that this is factually true based on what you are arguing as opposition. But the second large leap that you have to believe under opposition is that you have to believe that opposition, this person will not change. I think that we have many demonstrations and many structural reasons why individuals are very likely to change. In fact, many people better than this individual we're debating about, who are well-trained doctors, soldiers, and even accountants or capitalists, have had their minds changed because of many big historical events, like, for example, 9/11, like, for example, their family members dying, ABC. But the fact that this is an intense like situation in your life suddenly will make you not change and not persuaded. If you don't believe this jump, then I'd like to quote what opposition reply said. You can't believe their entire case. But the final thing they say is that the big jump that religion for them isn't real. This is very unengaging, and this is the basis of all of their response. If you're able to show you that this is something that's unproven, but moreover is not effective to stick against government's arguments, then they cannot win. The fact is, number one, they never responded to Pascal's wager that even if a religion isn't real, the probabilities of them dying, which means you end their suffering, is something that's also fine. It's just net neutral. But the fact that you risk the nirvana and eternal happiness that you have means that it's a bigger trade-off under their side. But number two, the fact that Enzo fiated in this motion that you can talk to them, you can engage with them as much as you'd like to be able to allow yourself to be persuaded by it, means that you have the capacity to believe that this is true, and this is something that they have never engaged with across four speakers in their bench. But the final thing is that it doesn't matter whether or not you believe it. The fact that it is true for them means that this is something that matters to them. And this means that since they never responded to the fact that this is true for the people, for the bubbleheads that believe it, this means that a lot of our arguments still stand. That is the idea that this could radicalize the bubblehead movement, which they only say, that's radical. But radical arguments aren't bad arguments. When we told you how this opens Pandora's box and something that you can never reverse and never repair, even as a pacifist. But the final thing I'd like to resolve is, how much does it really matter for you to be pacifist? Because you are a moral person, either from just being a normal human being that lives within society, or because of your personally ascribed morality, being a pacifist. But the answer we gave to you and the framing that this debate relies on is that humans are not monoliths. And we already made to you how much guilt you're likely to have when you imagine the suffering of dynamic lives versus the suffering of versus just the idea of dead people who are just like dichotomically just dead or alive. Under their side, you suffer the guilt of these people not being able to fulfill their own purpose when you yourself cannot imagine yourself not fulfilling your own purpose. I think that because you as a yourself believe in a particular purposefulness of life, you're more likely to apply it to these people as well. Very proud to propose.
All right. Thank you everyone for those speeches. Maybe we should stop the recording now if I'm still here. No? Okay.